For years, Carvana presented itself as the modern solution to everything people disliked about buying a used car. But as the company scaled nationwide, that promise quietly began to shift. Delivery dates started slipping without clear explanations. Some cars arrived with cosmetic damage or mechanical issues buyers hadn't expected. Paperwork delays left customers waiting weeks, sometimes months, for valid titles. What initially felt like scattered frustrations slowly revealed a consistent pattern. At the same time, employees, transport partners, and state regulators began describing similar breakdowns, suggesting the problem wasn't limited to individual transactions, but embedded deeper in how the system worked. So what actually changed as instant car buying scaled up? The answer isn't found in a single scandal or one bad decision, but in design choices most customers never see. In this video, we reveal how Carvana's business model was built to scale, why those hidden decisions created pressure points throughout the system, and how understanding them can help you avoid the biggest risks today. Before Carvana, buying a used car followed a familiar and often exhausting script. Dealership visits meant long waits, aggressive sales tactics, confusing add-ons, and prices that seemed to change depending on who was asking. Even well-intentioned dealers operated within a system that left buyers feeling defensive and uncertain. The process wasn't just inconvenient, it was emotionally draining. Carvana entered that landscape with a radically different offer. Instead of negotiating across a desk, buyers could scroll. Instead of sales pressure, there were fixed prices. The company promised that everything, browsing, financing, paperwork, and delivery, could happen online, on the customer's terms. The idea wasn't just speed, it was control. That sense of control carried emotional weight. Shoppers could compare vehicles without judgment, walk away without confrontation, and make decisions privately. For many first-time buyers, busy professionals, and people who simply disliked dealerships, this felt liberating. Buying a car began to resemble buying anything else online. Predictable, transparent, and calm. The physical vending machines reinforced that feeling. They weren't just marketing stunts, they symbolized certainty. Insert a token, watch the car descend, drive away. The message was clear. The hard parts had already been handled. Carvana's original promise wasn't that cars would be perfect. It was that the process would be. And for a time, that promise felt believable. Carvana's model looked simple from the outside, but it was never small. What began as a streamlined alternative to the dealership experience quickly expanded into a national operation with ambitions far beyond convenience. To make instant car buying work everywhere, the company had to build an enormous hidden infrastructure. Inventory had to be sourced at scale, often through large wholesale auctions rather than local trade-ins. Vehicles needed to be transported across state lines, inspected, reconditioned, stored, photographed, listed, financed, sold, delivered, and titled, all within a single, tightly timed system. Each step depended on the one before it working flawlessly. As Carvana grew, so did its footprint. Dozens of inspection and reconditioning centers were opened. Thousands of transport routes were coordinated. State-specific legal requirements for registration and titles had to be navigated simultaneously. What appeared to customers as a single click was, in reality, a chain of interdependent processes stretched across the country. The vending machines became visual shorthand for this scale. Each one represented not just inventory, but logistics, staffing, compliance, and capital investment. A simple product, a used car, was now moving through a machine built for speed and volume. At this size, small inefficiencies didn't stay small. Delays multiplied. Mistakes traveled. Scale amplified everything. And once the system reached that point, even minor disruptions had the potential to affect thousands of buyers at once. The earliest signs of trouble didn't look like a crisis. They appeared as minor inconveniences. The kind customers were willing to excuse in exchange for convenience. A delivery that arrived a few days late. A support email that took longer than expected to receive a reply. A promise to check back soon that stretched into another week. At first, these moments felt isolated. Buying a car online was still new, and many customers assumed delays were simply part of a growing process. Carvana's messaging reinforced that idea. framing issues as temporary friction in an otherwise modern system. Over time, however, those small frictions became more frequent. Delivery windows began shifting repeatedly. Some buyers reported having to reschedule time off work multiple times as arrival dates changed. Communication became more automated, with fewer clear answers and more scripted responses. Paperwork delays emerged quietly. Title transfers, once expected to follow within a predictable time frame, started taking longer. Customers were told the process was in progress or pending with the state, even as weeks passed. For most, the car still worked, so the delay felt annoying rather than alarming. None of these issues alone signaled a collapse, but together, they formed a pattern. The system still functioned, just not as smoothly. And because the problems arrived slowly, many people adjusted their expectations instead of questioning the structure behind them. As Carvana's volume increased, the way it sourced and processed vehicles had to change. Early on, much of its inventory came from manageable channels, trade-ins, select auctions, and smaller batches that allowed for closer scrutiny. At national scale, that approach was no longer sufficient. Inventory needed to be replenished continuously in large quantities and from wherever supply was available. This pushed the company deeper into high-volume wholesale auctions. Cars were acquired quickly, often without the opportunity for extended, hands-on evaluation. Inspections still existed, but they were time-bound and standardized, designed to keep vehicles moving through the system rather than lingering for detailed diagnosis. At scale, every additional inspection minute carried a cost. Reconditioning centers faced similar pressure. Vehicles arrived in waves, each one requiring cleaning, repairs, photography, and documentation. When throughput mattered more than perfection, decisions had to be made about what issues were acceptable to defer. Cosmetic flaws might be noted, but not repaired. Mechanical concerns that didn't trigger immediate failure could pass through. Centralized standards also struggled to account for local realities. A vehicle sourced in one climate and delivered to another could behave differently. Wear patterns, corrosion, and region-specific issues didn't always fit neatly into uniform checklists. The result wasn't widespread failure, but inconsistency. Some buyers received cars in excellent condition, others encountered problems that felt surprising, given the promise of inspection and transparency. The same system produced both outcomes, not because it was broken, but because it was optimized for movement, not certainty. Selling a used car online looks efficient, but the underlying costs are heavy and constant. Every vehicle must be transported, stored, inspected, reconditioned, insured, financed, and eventually delivered, often across long distances. As Carvana scaled, those costs didn't rise evenly. They compounded. Logistics became one of the largest pressure points. Moving cars between auctions, inspection centers, storage lots, and customers required a complex transport network sensitive to fuel prices, driver availability, and scheduling disruptions. Even small delays created cascading costs, extra storage days, rescheduled deliveries, and repeated handling. Labor added another layer. Inspection and reconditioning centers required trained staff, yet hiring and retaining workers became more difficult as volume increased. Turnover meant less experienced teams working faster with less margin for error. At the same time, customer support teams faced rising caseloads without a corresponding increase in authority to resolve systemic problems. Margins tightened, used car prices fluctuated, interest rates shifted, and return rates carried real financial consequences. A single returned vehicle wasn't just a refund, it triggered transport back, reprocessing, and relisting. Each loop through the system increased cost while generating no new value. In this environment, incentives quietly shifted. Speed became protection. Moving cars quickly reduced exposure, even if it meant deferring resolution. The system didn't reward slowing down to be perfect. It rewarded staying in motion, and that pressure shaped decisions at every level of the operation. Carvana trained customers to expect something closer to an e-commerce experience than a traditional vehicle purchase. The interface was clean, timelines were clearly displayed, and the process suggested predictability. For many buyers, the mental model was simple. Choose a car, check out, wait for delivery, drive away. The reality behind the screen was far more constrained. Cars are regulated differently in every state. Title transfers depend on third parties, government processing times, and accurate paperwork at every handoff. A single missing document or delayed signature can halt the process, regardless of how smoothly the rest of the transaction went. This gap created friction on both sides. Customers expected firm delivery dates and fast resolution when something went wrong. Support teams, however, operated within systems they couldn't accelerate. Many issues required coordination across logistics partners, reconditioning centers, lenders, and state agencies, none of which moved at digital speed. From the customer's perspective, the silence felt avoidable. From inside the system, delays were structural. Frontline employees could apologize, escalate, and reassure, but they often lacked the tools to actually change outcomes. Neither side was unreasonable. Buyers were responding to the promise they were given. The system was responding to the limits it couldn't escape. The conflict wasn't caused by bad actors. It was caused by a promise that assumed fewer constraints than reality allowed. For a long time, Carvana's customers were willing to overlook imperfections because the trade-off felt worthwhile. Convenience had value. Avoiding dealerships had value. Even minor delays or uncertainties could be tolerated if the overall deal still felt favorable. That balance shifted as prices rose. Used car values increased across the market, and Carvana's listings began to closely mirror, and sometimes exceed, local dealership prices. Delivery fees, financing costs, and the loss of negotiating leverage further narrowed the gap. What once felt like a premium for convenience began to feel like a surcharge for uncertainty. At the same time, alternatives improved. Dealerships adopted online browsing and digital paperwork. Local sellers offered inspections and warranties to compete. The difference in effort between buying online and buying locally shrank, while the difference in risk became more visible. This created a psychological breakpoint. If a car cost roughly the same either way, tolerance dropped sharply. Delays felt less forgivable. Quality issues felt more serious. Title problems felt unacceptable. The question quietly changed from, "Is this easier?" to, "Why am I taking this risk?" Once that question appeared, the original promise lost its protective power. The system hadn't necessarily worsened overnight, but the margin that allowed people to forgive it disappeared. Once pressure entered the system, it began to reinforce itself. A delayed delivery didn't end with a late arrival. It often triggered rescheduling, additional transport coordination, and extended storage. Each delay added cost without adding value. Those delays increased returns. Customers who waited weeks were less patient when a car arrived with unexpected issues. Returns sent vehicles back through the system. More transport, more inspections, more administrative work. A single car could loop through multiple buyers before finally settling, accumulating cost at every pass. Higher costs tightened margins further. To compensate, the system leaned harder on speed. Faster processing reduced exposure time, but increased the likelihood of mistakes. Mistakes generated more customer complaints, which required refunds, credits, or extended support interactions, all additional expenses. As trust declined, customers became more cautious. Some canceled orders earlier. Others scrutinized vehicles more aggressively. That scrutiny increased return rates, which fed back into operational strain. The system wasn't failing in one place. It was oscillating under pressure. This loop was difficult to interrupt because each fix created a new cost elsewhere. Slowing down improved quality, but increased holding expenses. Speeding up reduced holding time, but increased errors. The system kept moving, but every cycle made it slightly less stable than the last. Carvana's most serious problem didn't arrive as a sudden backlash. It arrived as hesitation. Buyers began approaching the platform with caution rather than excitement. The experience no longer felt like a confident shortcut, but a calculated risk. Many customers described the process in careful language. "I only use it if I have no other option." It feels like a gamble now. These weren't emotional reactions. They were assessments. People weren't angry. They were uncertain. Trust eroded quietly through stories of title delays, repeated rescheduling, and unresolved support cases. Even when transactions eventually worked out, the uncertainty lingered. A system that requires patience and contingency planning stops feeling helpful. What made this collapse dangerous was its subtlety. Angry customers complain loudly, but hesitant customers simply leave. They choose local dealers, private sellers, or delay buying altogether. The exit wasn't dramatic, it was invisible. At that point, marketing mattered less. Promises mattered less. The question became whether the platform felt safe to rely on. Once that feeling disappeared, the system lost something far more valuable than sales volume. It lost the assumption of reliability, the quiet confidence that once made people click buy without second guessing. Markets rarely leave gaps unfilled. As confidence in instant car buying weakened, alternatives adjusted to absorb the demand that drifted away. Traditional dealerships, long criticized for friction, began modernizing the parts of the experience that customers valued most. Many dealers invested in online inventories, upfront pricing, and digital paperwork. Buyers could browse from home, secure financing, and arrive only to finalize delivery. While the process still involved a physical location, the uncertainty around titles, inspections, and registration felt lower because those steps remained local and familiar. Independent used car dealers also regained relevance. Smaller operations could inspect vehicles more thoroughly and resolve issues face-to-face. For some buyers, the ability to speak directly to the person responsible for the sale outweighed the convenience of full automation. Hybrid models emerged as well. Platforms offered listings and financing while leaving inspection and pickup local. Third-party inspection services grew, allowing buyers to regain control over quality verification rather than outsourcing trust entirely to a distant system. None of these options were perfect, but they addressed the same need from a different angle. As Carvana's promise lost clarity, the market didn't abandon convenience. It redistributed it into models that felt more predictable and easier to verify. Carvana still functions best when the transaction stays simple. Vehicles with clean histories, common models, and straightforward ownership chains tend to move through the system with fewer complications. For buyers seeking widely available cars without customization or special conditions, the platform can still deliver on convenience. The risk increases as complexity rises. Cars sourced from multiple prior owners, out-of-state titles, or recent auction purchases are more vulnerable to delays. Extended delivery distances add uncertainty, as do peak buying periods when logistics networks are stretched thin. In these cases, timelines displayed at checkout should be treated as estimates rather than commitments. Buyers can reduce exposure by slowing the process intentionally, reviewing inspection reports carefully, requesting clarification on noted issues, and documenting communication creates leverage if problems arise. Scheduling independent inspections immediately after delivery helps catch issues within return windows. Financing terms should be reviewed closely, as refinancing or early payoff can become complicated if paperwork lags. Patience matters, but so does decisiveness. If delivery dates shift repeatedly or documentation stalls, canceling early often limits cost and stress. Carvana's return policy is most effective when used promptly, before emotional investment sets in. Used selectively, the platform remains a tool, not a guarantee. The key is aligning expectations with the system's limits and treating convenience as conditional rather than assumed. Carvana today is still a major player in online car sales, but it is no longer the seamless shortcut it once promised. The company continues to offer convenience for buyers seeking common vehicles, quick financing, and a fully online interface. In those cases, the platform delivers an experience that is faster and less confrontational than traditional dealerships. What it isn't, however, is a guarantee of smoothness or certainty. Systemic pressures, from logistics, staffing, and state regulations, continue to create inconsistencies in delivery times, vehicle condition, and paperwork. Even loyal users may encounter unexpected delays or complications, particularly with high demand or complex vehicles. The broader lesson is structural rather than personal. The company's promise was designed around scalability, not perfection. As a result, the platform operates within limits that buyers must understand to avoid frustration. Convenience and risk coexist, and recognizing that balance is essential. For those willing to navigate the system carefully, Carvana remains useful. For those expecting full reliability without oversight, disappointment is likely. Understanding what the company can realistically provide and what it cannot is now the central factor in deciding how to use it. Finally, experiences vary widely. To better grasp the evolving reality of online car buying, share your story so we can piece together a clearer picture of what the platform really delivers today.